Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, bonamili wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Iowa. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new picture book. It's called Stinkbird Has a Superpower. Please welcome to the show, Jill Esbaum. Hey, Jill, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jed.
I'm delighted to have you on. If my beautiful wife were here, she might tell you that my superpower was being a stinkbird. But that's probably not what you wrote the book about.
I'm afraid to ask why. No, that's not exactly why I wrote the book. Do you want to hear the backstory?
I do.
Okay, well, I've done a lot of work for National Geographic Kids, which has been a pure joy. And one of the things they had me do was a series that featured the Angry Birds. And one of the books was going to be the Angry Birds who were going to be down in the Amazon rainforest. And they were going to meet a lot of different animals. So, having never been to the Amazon, I, of course, did a lot of research online and in books. And it got a little bit depressing because every animal that I researched was trying to eat some other animal to stay alive. It was the food chain brought to bloody and colorful life. No shortage of YouTube videos on that either, so that was kind of strange. But then I found the Hoatzin, which is a bird about the size of a pheasant or a chicken, can't fly very well, hangs out in flocks, and the refreshing thing about the Hoatzin was that nobody wants to eat it, and all it eats is leaves. So the thing is, those leaves go through the system so slowly, and it has a multi-chambered stomach like a cow. So when those leaves finally come out, they smell like cow manure. And that gives the Hoatzin its nickname of Stinkbird. So I really loved the Stinkbird for many reasons, but when I found out that their chicks are the only chicks in the world that have little claws on their wings, on the front of their wings, about halfway down, so that they have the neatest escape that I've ever heard of with birds. The parents build their nest, just loose stick nests out on a low branch that goes out over a rushing river. And they do that, which I thought at first seemed like a not safe thing at all. But they do that so that the chicks, when they're unattended, when the parents are off eating, the chicks are unattended. And even though nobody wants to eat the adults, the chicks don't stink yet. So they are a favorite food of snakes and predatory birds of prey and monkeys. Monkeys will eat them. So if a little bird sees that coming, they will fall off the edge of the nest down into the river, and then they can swim underwater back to shore, and they just hang tight until they see that the threat is gone. And then they use those little wing claws along with their feet to actually climb out of the water, back to the tree, back up to the nest, and they're safe. And I thought, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard, bird-wise.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a book about just them. At first I was told that one-off books about one animal were really tough to sell, and maybe I should find other odd animals that I could put into the same book. But I really liked that Stinkbird, and I thought just the name Stinkbird has kids, it gets their interest right away. So the fact that we could call what chicks do a superpower just led to, one thing led to another. And my initial manuscript, I'll call it a manuscript, not a book, because you write on spec, basically. So in that, the dad, Stinkbird, was telling kid readers about his kind and why he was so proud to be a stinkbird, despite his name. And, the chick wasn't introduced till the very end, and the chick didn't speak. And that manuscript was rejected probably a dozen times. And so one thing, I think my superpower is looking at a manuscript and knowing something's missing. So then the next step is figuring out what that something is. In this case, I thought, what if the chick could be brought up to the forefront, and immediately, your brain starts making things work and figuring out how that could happen. And gosh, it was so fun because the chick is just a typical toddler, curious and enthusiastic and clueless about its own superpower. So that became the fun, the dad getting to tell the chick about his own superpower.
What a neat way to tell the story, and certainly tell the story, the true story of a bird that we probably here living in the States are probably never going to run into.
I had never heard of it.
Yeah, certainly not. Yeah. You seem to have a great love of introducing kids to creatures that we're probably not going to meet in our everyday lives.
Well, that's part of it. And let's face it, the other part of it as a writer is that regular animals have already been talked about. And there's a lot of books about bears and bunnies and cats and dogs. So eventually kind of need to find something that breaks out a little bit. So,
hey, I want to bring, because we have a lot of authors listening to the show and aspiring authors. And one of the pieces of advice that we've heard over the years from some fantastic authors is this idea of write what you love. And I think that that's certainly, wonderful advice. But as you were just saying, if somebody loves bunnies and dogs and pigeons and bears, well, there's a lot of books out there about these things. Can you kind of give some advice that kind of takes into account what you were just talking about, that when you're writing about what you love, you gotta also have to write about something that's marketable, so maybe you kind of have to go out and find something new to fall in love with?
That, I think, is a really smart way to put it. Yes, find something new to fall in love with. I'm an animal lover anyway, so why not find the quirky ones that kids may not have heard of? Well, now a lot of kids watch Wild Kratts, so Kratt Brothers introduce a lot of unusual animals. But when you're a writer and you write a dog story, you're already making the odds go up for that story to be accepted. I mean, go down, I should say. Because what if they get 10 dog stories that week, or worse, that day? I mean, so if you have to find a completely new way to tell a dog story if that's what you want to do. Like I have a couple of dog stories, a couple of cat stories, and they're in my I want to write about this file, and they're loosely outlined, but I haven't yet attacked the actual writing because you have to come up with a new and different spin that's entirely your own. And when it comes to writing what you love, I don't know how many times somebody has come to me and say, you should write about this. And I think, no, because I'm not passionate about it. You are. You should write about that. So you really have to find the angle that will work. And to do that, you have to know the market. You have to know what's out there. And that just takes time and a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned talking about, getting through that process of, getting an editor, getting a publisher's attention, getting them to want to buy your story. And we talk here on the podcast, and we're talking to aspiring authors and published authors and share with them the reality that there are literally thousands of books published every single month. And if only a small percentage of books that are written get published, then that means there are tens of thousands of books pitched to publishers and agents and editors every single month, and that they're getting in it. I mean, I feel overwhelmed sometimes with all the pitches that I get every day of guests wanting to be on the show. I can't imagine how overwhelmed a publisher or an editor must be with all the different submissions that they get. So you're making a great point. You have to stand out, and it's really tough to be that one out of 100 dog books to stand out, as opposed to being that one book about a stinkbird that's going across an editor's desk.
Not that didn't have to stand out too. But, once I got the chick in there and I had so much fun with it, I was so fortunate that an editor at Putnam saw it and she grabbed at it. And then when she told me who was going to illustrate it, I'll tell you, I about fainted. That was Bob Shea, who to me is, one of my literary heroes. And, I think everybody I know that has kids has at least one Bob Shea book in their collection. So, I think he just took it and ran with it, and seeing what he did and then seeing what he's done for the next one in the series next year, which is called Parrotfish Has a Superpower, just makes these such a joy to talk about. Mm-hmm. So, it's one reason I'm happy to be on here to talk about them. They're just adorable. I mean, just bright and funny and engaging, and he made them what they are, in my opinion.
One of the things that we talk about with authors, and it's something kind of a learning curve that I was delighted to learn and be introduced to, is that part of the skill of writing a picture book is leaving room for the illustrator to tell their part of the story. What part of the story did Bob tell that really kind of surprised you or especially delighted you?
Oh, gosh. I do not know right offhand. I would have to sit and look through the book. They're just things like when the Papa Stinkbird talks about how there are other creatures in the forest that eat other creatures. That's how they stay alive. There are these little eyes peeking out of the forest here and there, or you'll see a very subtle snake in the background that blends in beautifully. And I mean, you can't do that as an author. That is something that only an illustrator can bring to the table. And, it just delights, when I'm constantly surprised by what illustrators do. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. One, I know you were excited about talking about the superpower that the Stinkbird chick has. You're also very passionate, I've read that, of letting kids and adults know that each and every one of us has a superpower. How did you come to embrace that idea?
I do believe that. Well, to me, one of the saddest things is when I'm talking with kids and somebody says that they believe that there's nothing special about them. And I think, oh, honey, there's so much. And at the same time, I just think, okay, what can I do to try to pump that up, especially when I'm just in a school visiting for a day. I had a little girl take me aside just last week and talk to me about being bullied. And it just killed me, and I thought, man, she was such a unique, creative kid. She showed me some of the art she'd done, and I thought, I just hate it that somebody doesn't appreciate that. But as for kids, I think this book in particular, I hope, will spark discussion in families. What is it about you that's so special? We'll call it a superpower. It might be something that's a talent you're born with, or it might be something that is a life skill that you're really good at. Boy, you are really good at bringing people together and getting kids to play all together. That's a superpower. Mm-hmm. Or maybe something like, you are the best skipper in our family. That's your superpower. It could be, you are so patient, or you never give up. No matter what you try, you never give up. There's just things that kids don't think that way, so sometimes we have to help them along. And I think, wow, if this can spark that in a family or in a classroom, I am going to be a very happy camper.
Yeah. Well, I loved that you mentioned, families having conversations about this topic, because that's what the Reading with Your Kids podcast is all about, which is inspiring families to have these conversations. And that is one of the main reasons I launched the show 6 years ago was to help families understand, we talk about the benefits of reading with our kids and developing vocabulary and learning the letters, all that. That's fantastic. But to me, the great real benefits of reading with our kids are the bond that we develop with our kids, and also the opportunity to have conversations that are initiated kind of naturally and that really empower kids and bring us closer together, like the conversation that you were mentioning. Instead of just sitting down and telling a kid, hey, you're special, I love you, you're special, and you got a superpower. It's like, in one ear, out the other. But to sit down and have a conversation, hopefully inspired by reading Stinkbird Has a Superpower, and really kind of sitting down and helping a kid identify their own superpower, or helping to point out that, hey, this thing that you do that a lot of people take for granted, that is a superpower, and you should really embrace that and realize that you're unique in being able to do this thing.
And that's all the way up to adulthood. Mm-hmm. There are adults I know who think, oh, well, I'm just this or I'm just that. And I think you are so much more. When you're good at something naturally, you tend to think that anybody can do it, which is odd, but I think it's true. So, anytime you can reinforce with anybody that, this thing you do is really something special, then that's a good thing, right? Yeah. Especially kids.
Yeah, it's true. With the passage of time and me almost at 100 years old, and through the magic of technology and social media, I am discovering the things that I took for granted that I did when I was a teenager. It had so much impact on people, and they're telling me, like when they rediscover me on Facebook, oh, this thing that you used to do and that, and you were so this and that. And I'm like, everybody was like that. What are you talking about? Why do you think I'm special? But it turns out that we are special, that we do have these gifts that we don't realize.
Exactly. And think how many opportunities we let pass by because we think we can't do something. Mm-hmm. I have an older friend who, I don't know, she found out all the different hobbies I love to do. And she said, oh my gosh, you can do anything. And I said, well, so can you. All you have to do is learn how. Right. It's a step-by-step process for anything you want. And what does it hurt to try?
Right.
I mean, you want to try to paint, so take some lessons. If you stink at it, then try something different. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was very fortunate, I think, to have parents that were 100% behind whatever we wanted to try and never let us feel like we couldn't do something. Even my parents, I was almost 40 when I decided to try writing for kids, and my dad was like, oh yeah, I can see you doing that. Mm-hmm. And that means everything. Even as an adult, it means everything to have somebody believe in you and stand behind you and be supportive.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because we say this and remind parents of this all the time, that parents, you are your kids' first and most important teacher. And I know it's hard to believe that, especially when they get to middle school and they're telling you how much they hate you every day, that you are still their most important teacher, and the words of encouragement that you give your kids are so important. And it's important to your kids when they're 2 and 3 years old, when they're 12 and 13 years old, and as Jill just reminded us, when you're like kind of a few decades away from middle school.
Jed, and on the other side of that coin, one thoughtless comment from anybody out in the world can crush a kid. Mm-hmm. My son had a friend who didn't smile in junior high. Mm. And it was because he had a space between his front teeth. And it wasn't until that got fixed when he was a teenager, all of a sudden he was smiling all the time. And it's like, wow, what that child believed about himself was so not true. I mean, somebody said something at some point along the way that made him think, okay, I'm not going to let anybody see this. Mm-hmm. And it was just, they just take everything to heart, and their little souls are so precious that I think, we have to do everything we can as parents and grandparents and teachers to, bolster them. They get enough crushing from elsewhere. So.
Right. Yeah. Hey, before we go, I wanted to talk to you about one of the books on your website that caught my eye is How Slow is a Sloth? And it caught my eye because my beautiful wife and I have spent some time exploring Central America and have run into a few sloths and have learned about sloths and learned that there's a difference between a two-toed and a three-toed, and I forget the differences off the top of my head. But I know they only come down from the trees once a month, and that's to go to the bathroom. But you have such a love of animals. I'm wondering, have you had a chance to really kind of go out and meet some of these exotic animals that you write about in the real world?
Only in a zoo, unfortunately. No, I have not been like to Costa Rica, like a friend of mine who got to hold a sloth and snuggle with a sloth. And I thought, oh, I would love that. No, let's say not yet.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Not yet. Not yet. And I wonder what your reaction will be when you finally meet a stinkbird, if you'll want to cuddle with it.
Yeah, well, I'd have to go to South America, so I don't know. I may not want it on me, but I would love to see one. We had friends that did go to the Amazon, and they were showing us pictures, and this is before Stinkbird had a superpower was sold. And so I had the manuscript floating around out there, and she was showing me pictures from the Amazon, and she came to a picture of the stinkbird, like group of stinkbirds, and I said, oh my gosh, stinkbirds! And she looked at me like she was shocked that I even knew what that was, and I said, oh yeah, I know the stinkbird. I love the stinkbird. And she said, yeah, they were really neat to learn about. And I said, well, I got a book about that.
There you go.
Maybe someday. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy that it's finally here.
That's wonderful. We should tell people where they can go to find that website that I was referring to so they can find out more about you and all the great books that you've created.
Well, you can see more about me and my books at JillSbaum.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at JSbaum. And I also, on Facebook, have an author page. Author Jill Esbaum is it. You can follow that if you want to see the latest. Be kept updated. Stinkbird premieres May 16th, so...
Wonderful. Well, we are so happy to be one of the first to share folks' news about Stinkbird, and we want to encourage everybody to check out. Stinkbird has a superpower, not a superpower, a superpower.
That's another book.
Yes. Our guest has been the author of Stinkbird Has a Superpower, Jill Esbaum. Jill, thanks so much for being with us.
Nice chatting. Good to meet you, Jed.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcast. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team. Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.